podcast brought to you by thebuildphase.com, helping you build a better turn. My name is Mr. Ben. Today's episode, Trial by Sword. Episode 33 here on the Build Phase podcast, and today we have another interview. The guest is David Leader, a prominent tournament finisher in Versus Old and New, and the conversation ranges from non-related games to old verses to new verses, as well as some advice for Upper Deck on how to better handle their gaming products. Remember to stay tuned till the end of the show to get the details on how you can get entered into a drawing for 2 Hellboy life counters from the old versus system. First, I'd like to welcome you to the Build Phase. I appreciate taking time out of your day to come chat with me about the card game.
Thanks for having me.
To start us off, I'd like you to just tell us who you are and your background to games in general, and from there we'll kind of segue into old versus and new.
Perfect. Well, my name is David Leader. I've been gaming since as long as I can remember. I used to have an old Pong game, and my parents used to have a weekly board game night. Segueing through, had some success in Magic, played in 8 Pro Tours way back in the day.
What expansion did you get started with?
Ice Age. Ironically, I actually started with a game called Vampire the Masquerade, which was a multiplayer game. We used to play 10 players, and there was so much time between games that I actually learned to play Magic between rounds on Vampire.
Did you just play the card game, or were you into the paper and pencil role-playing game as well?
I originally just played the card game. That actually led me to playing the role-playing game. I've been role-playing since I was 5 years old when I was introduced to Dungeons & Dragons.
I was a huge fan of pretty much everything White Wolf did there in the 90s. Vampire, Wraith, the werewolf stuff. I think it appealed to me most was the 9-sided die that was used for everything instead of having all these different shapes like in D&D.
Yep, it was nice. They kept things very role-playing interacting as well. People really got into their characters. I actually did some level of LARPing. That was actually kind of part of how I managed to overcome social anxiety back in the days. Yeah, it was good times. Definitely like all things that White Wolf did. Continued to play the card game for quite a while until shut down, I guess about 7 years ago or so. All good memories. So yeah, as far as Versus is concerned, I won one of their Versus Pro Circuit games, and I took 4th in another one. Had some other facings. I was a member of a team FTN. My primary responsibility was setting up drafts, and I gave everybody, there used to be a limited format in that game. I used to give everybody draft lists so that we could use that as one of our competitive strengths in trying to get us to the top 8. And as far as new Versus, I took 4th with a deck largely built by Colby Garish and Justin Hager in the first Pro Circuit, and took 8 with a kind of throw-together deck, the Ripley number 8 deck in this most recent Pro Circuit.
Well, I definitely want to dig deep into both of those decks. But before we do that, I'd like to circle back around to old versus. As listeners of the show are probably aware, I name every episode after a card from the old versus game. So I wanted to give you the opportunity, if you have a favorite card or cards that you wanted to talk about and maybe pick one for the show title, this would be the chance to share those anecdotes.
Because it's a fun story and very much leads into what actually happened in the most recent Pro Circuit, I'm going to go with Trial by Sword. What Trial by Swords is, not unlike current Versus, or at least current Versus prior to this soft banning of Thanos, the Pro Circuit I won was dominated by exactly one deck. It was named Glee, which was Green Lantern, Emerald Enemies. The Pro Circuit only had 2 sets that were available to play, and everybody played with this. Trial by Swords was our competitive advantage. That card was pretty much unseen by everybody else. It came from a little obscure set that went largely ignored, and what it did was it gave us a huge defensive boost. Back in old Versus, unlike new Versus, it was actually really, really difficult to force an attack to bounce. So when we were able to cause attacks to bounce, and other people were not, that gave us the competitive edge, led us through. My drafting skills got me to the top 8, and from there, myself and one of my teammates managed to take both first and second in that Pro Circuit.
Awesome. I was a huge fan of old Versus. I was very hesitant when the new game came out, thinking that it might just be some kind of like a cash grab and that there wasn't legitimate support behind it. And some of the rules changes kind of rubbed me the wrong way. Now, I have mostly been won over. However, I'm curious, as
somebody who had great success in old versus, what were your first impressions of the changes between the two games? And was there anything that you reverse position on, like, oh, I don't like this, and then it kind of grew on you?
I took the game as an entirely new game. In the end, I love superheroes. I don't see a terribly big resemblance to old versus, and I mostly liked what they were trying to do with the game. They were trying to do a little bit of what they tried to do towards the very end of making you feel special, feel like you're an actual character, give the characters a lot more flavor than maybe they did in the early games, and eliminate things that put off newer players, like very, very, very limited search. And what they've removed is a lot of the complexity, which is good and bad. As a standard gamer and also somebody who now plays a lot of games with my niece, I love both casual and the deep games, and I miss those strong turns where you might search 5 or 6 times and manage to come up with the perfect strategy that most other people couldn't. This game's obviously a little more luck-based. They are trying to appeal a little bit to the more casual players, but it flows faster, and I like that a lot about it. They've won me over. I think Upper Deck needs to work a lot on its marketing skills and have a little bit more liberal banning policy, listen to the fans and such, get rid of the negative experiences that inevitably trying to create a new game will make. But I think that they're excellent game designers, and I really think they put a lot of flavor into the characters in this game.
Speaking of being a little more liberal with bans, if it was up to you, how would you handle Thanos?
Thanos needs a straight ban. I actually got an opportunity to talk to the developer of the game. Colby won the Versus 10K this round, and one of the lesser known things that you get to do when you win that is you get to go to an after party that is usually reserved only for press. And in that after party, we actually got to talk with the designer and creator of Versus. And at that after party, he revealed that Thanos, Cosmo, even the odds, all of these cards that ended up too powerful were very late game changes because nobody was playing villains and guardians. They tried to give it a beef up without it going through full play testing, and you see kind of the results that came out of that. They wanted those teams to be playable. They wanted people to play villains. They gave Thanos a boost from whatever he had. The team villains, unfortunately, is otherwise largely unplayable. You can make some arguments towards Loki, but he's really been shaded out by a lot of the other better control decks. I don't know whether they can make a new version that would have equal flavor, but trying to do things like change the number of cards that he did, whether he destroys resources, whether you have to choose some of the effects. There are a lot of opportunities, but it wouldn't take that much to stop him from being playable. I think ban and maybe get villains a new villain card in the expansion that's kind of new and exciting and introduces him through.
I like that idea much better than some kind of an errata where you end up with, well, no, hey, you go to this website and it says the card is actually supposed to say that, no.
Alienates players a lot, yeah. You don't want to go that route. And along ban cards, for the record, I would personally ban Singularity as well. If I had to guess, usually when designers of L-Sheath Gs test a card, they test it on team. Singularity Pixie on just the, my mind's blanking. It's
A-Force.
A-Force, thank you. Just on A-Force are very good, have some great interactions with Pixie and Spectrum, but aren't ultimately overpowering. If you happen to get a Phoenix out of it, well, she's a 7/7 with 1 wound. You can probably take her out or at least make them spend the resources. And 7/7's not as hard to overcome as some of the things that end up coming out. If I had her to do over again, and if we were going the errata route, I would have taken Singularity and said any number of A-Force characters instead of any number of characters. But like we just said, I'm more for banning and correcting with a new card than trying to issue a errata that might alienate new players.
So one of the questions I had in my list here was to ask if there were any cards other than Thanos that you felt were oppressive. I think Singularity with the Pixie combo falls onto that list. Is there anything else that you would think is too oppressive?
I don't think so. Once upon a time, I would have said Cosmo, and I think Cosmo is still great. They've printed excellent answers in the form of the M41 and Leaping Xenomorph that take care of him, make him no longer a must-have in decks. Plenty of decks will still play him. I like that. That means he's good without overpowering the game. I think if they took out those two cards, we'd have an interesting and more diverse metagame. Already you're slowly starting to see the shift from Thanos to lots and lots and lots of decks that try to abuse Singularity in the best way possible. Without Singularity, I don't think there's another card that would just take over, so we'd have a much more diverse game.
With regard to deck building in general, do you like to start with a main character and then construct a strategy around them? Or is it more thumbing through the cards, hey, I like this combo, what main character would work with that? Or is it some combination of the two?
It's the latter. As a deck builder, I tend to enjoy having fun, but in the scheme of what I'm having fun with, I'm going to go for that theme to be as competitive as possible. For example, I didn't start off with having a Spider-Man deck whenever I was making that deck. That's kind of gone around and has had a decent amount of success, at least once you take out some of the top decks. Instead, I said, how am I going to abuse -1/-1 counters as best as possible? Spider-Man's ability to defend the Cloak Dagger combo, especially if you have Dagger out and they can't use their -1/-1 effects, turned out to be one of the better ways. Thanks to Goblin Queen, he became fairly easy to level, and that's what I went with. So I try to find a fun theme. I go with it. In the terms of tournaments, the Ripley number 8 deck came out. I was trying to beat one deck, and Ripley number 8 simply had the best ability to do that.
With regards to Ripley 8, I'm assuming when you say you're trying to beat one deck, that was Thanos. Were you more focused on the combo Thanos variant or the curve build?
Curve build. It didn't take long to realize that very few people would play the combo-based Thanos. Well, good. It was incredibly inconsistent, very easy to disrupt, often couldn't beat its way out through Cosmo, couldn't handle things like, we saw very early that Leaping Xenomorph would do very well. It just didn't have the power, the raw power, and adding things like Kane, which is a very huge boost to consistency, would prevent your combo quite a bit. So combo just lost out a lot, so I was really just looking at standard run-of-the-mill Thanos that everybody was playing.
Did you feel that Ripley number 8 stood a good chance in general? I know you were focused on Thanos, but were there any matchups that you went in that you were worried about running into?
Well, I knew, for example, that Sister Grimm was an absolute 100% loss to me. I didn't have enough pumps to get through. Unfortunately, the team only had equipment, and I couldn't beat my way through 12 defensive cards using a little bit of equipment and team attacks. Her abilities are also really, really bad for me. I can't disrupt that. But no, the strict answer is I expected 50% of the metagame to be based on Thanos. My deck building strategy at tournaments has always been, if possible, take everybody by surprise. I knew a lot of people playing against the Ripley number 8 would give me games simply because they didn't know how to play against it. In the grand scheme of things, against the metagame, it was probably a pretty terrible deck, but you can't lose to Thanos with the deck, which is something no other deck that, to the extent I'm aware, can say. And you have an ability to take people by surprise. They don't know what's coming at them. They don't know how to play. A lot of people stood on the play against my deck, which is a terrible mistake, and that's what I relied on there. Aside from Sister Grimm, who I did play once and got absolutely crushed, I think I conceded turn 4. I think the deck did okay against the metagame, but definitely crushed Thanos.
Okay, well that segues into one of the later questions that I was going to get at with regard to releasing the Aliens expansion just before Gen Con and having very little to almost no time to playtest and to essentially solve the meta. My personal bias is towards, I like to see experienced deck pilots facing off in a known meta where it all comes down to the minutia of decision making. Having mentioned that you like taking people by surprise, I'm curious, do you fall on the other side of that and like having the expansion just a couple days before the event, which would give you that surprise advantage a little more than a known meta would?
I go back and forth with it. Being the game lover that I did, I certainly didn't get a lot of playtesting in. I was too busy enjoying the fantasticness that is Gen Con. But you do lose that defensive mechanism. I think as a company, unfortunately, Upper Deck is doing the right thing in keeping the game to a large tournament to make Gen Con really exciting. If they actually had a better news department and were able to build up the vibe and energy a lot better, I think they could get more out of that. But I think for the company, it's better off. Yes, it is annoying, especially for people who like to do lots of playtesting. I'd hate that people have to lose a day of Gen Con, but surprise factor is huge, and having the game released that day rewards people who are able to adapt really well and figure out how to beat the decks. If the deck had been released 1 week prior and people had a lot of meta and playtesting, neither I or the Dragon deck probably would have done nearly as well as they did.
You mentioned a couple times your background in drafting skills and the limited format in Old Versus. Actually, let me back up a little bit there. For anyone who did not play Magic or Old Versus, the limited format is taking sealed packs of cards and then building your deck out of the randomness that you get there. Do you feel that your background in the limited format is something that really allowed you to pull that Ripley 8 deck together in that small amount of time?
Well, first off, I have to give credit to Ian Vincent. Though he didn't design the deck, he did point out that if you could stop Thanos from gauntleting, that we didn't care about going down to 2 wounds, and that she had the ability to pull Goblin Queen out of their hand before it could be played on turn 4. So I'm going to give a shout out to that. But one thing it really did do is I adapt very quickly. I knew what I was kind of looking for out of the set, and just like Draft, where you're forced to adapt to a new situation, cards you don't have as well under control, my skills there let me translate into something that could beat and go through the metagame. Lots of games I didn't play. Like I said, I didn't do a ton of play testing. Did give me an edge and does help with my strengths a lot. So yeah, I mean, I definitely like it in that regard.
I would say that is something I miss from Old Versus. Playing sealed was one of my favorite components of that game, and while I do prefer the one and done purchase model of the new game, I miss being able to bust open a bunch of packs and just riot a jank pile to victory.
There is an answer to all of that. The game Epic, another LCG, has a fantastic draft format. They actually go from constructed to day 2 draft to constructed and top 8. And the way it works, it's pretty straightforward. You make a pile of decks so that you'd have all your cards together. You take a pile of 5 cards. Each of you do that. The person who picked up the 5 cards first takes one of those cards, passes it to the other person. They take 2 of those cards, and then 2 are discarded, never to be played by anybody. What that really does is lets you get through lots and lots of cards very, very quickly. It doesn't let you kind of metagame, though you can kind of read the draft and where they're going and stuff like that. In this game, you may have the basic resources be available, but you can take those cards, put them together, and it works really fantastically. Draft is certainly my favorite, probably the only reason I continue to play that game a decent bit, and I think that could work in Versus. So there are ways to handle it and have a lot of fun. I've never tried it in Versus. I'd be interested in doing so sometime.
How do you feel about alternate formats in general? When I spoke to Danny a few weeks ago, he mentioned that there was a tournament where it was all street level heroes, and my store has banned Thanos, so I suppose on some level that's an alternate format. I would say this game is too young for a rotational format, for cards being phased out as a set, but is that something, looking to the future, that you could see coming to Versus?
More than that, I actually think it's necessary to come into Versus. If you look at the most successful model that an LCG company has done, the owner of the LCG license, FFG Games, the way they keep the game fun all the time is they keep all their games on a continual rotation. So every month, one of their LCGs gets some new cards. Unfortunately, UDE only owns Versus as far as the limited games. So you kind of get momentum, you get excited about Aliens, play it for 3, maybe 4 weeks, then you put it away and wait for the next expansion. So to keep things fresh, interesting, and maybe find other ways to play, you can do other formats. Certainly the way that Colby Garish has been pushing for really hard in the game Netrunner, you have a limited number of influence points, which are points you can use essentially off team. If you were to tell people that they could have 12 cards from off team, and for the record, wild resources count as some of those 12 cards, then that would make a good format, and that would be different. You'd have to think that everybody else, including yourself, is playing mostly on team with little splashes here and there. You've got to figure out, if I could only have 12 cards, what's that? It makes it fun. It makes it exciting. What designers will tell you is, unfortunately, it eliminates new players from the game, because trying to figure out a new game from scratch is hard. trying to figure out the new rules that you've thrown on top of the game is nearly impossible. If we're going to keep to a every 3-4 months release, or now it looks like the next set is pushed out to 2017, they do not need to come out with alternate things to make it exciting and fun once again.
Something that I've floated at my playgroup is I have some of the old versus Galactus, one versus many sets, and we've taken the planet cards out of there. Now, they don't all translate perfectly to the new game, but each turn we flip one over and it's all characters have flight, or all characters get +2/+2, or just something different, essentially.
I think that'd be a fantastic ad. I mean, they could do that up, maybe make a $10, $20 little mini expansion that gives you a one versus many relationship to keep things interesting for people between sets. So that's a great idea.
I would love something like that. Taking a step back to Gen Con 2015, I think most people were able to look at that first set and pick Thanos out as the most powerful main character. At that time, did you look into the future and foresee the oppressive, broken disaster that he was going to be?
Absolutely not. The real story behind me playing Thanos, I won a box, I kind of looked over the cards, went to go play Gen Con, looked over my cards, let Colby know that I was playing Star-Lord, that I think that even the odds is the best card in the game. We get there the next morning, Colby says, you have to play Thanos. And I was like, what does he do? And I kind of looked at the card, kind of shrugged my shoulders, said he costs 4 resources. There's no way that we can really get that out. He was like, dude, Hager and I were playing this last night. It beats like everything. And I was like, well, I'm not playing Guardian of the Galaxy. They were playing Thanos, X-Men at the time. So Colby and I kind of looked over the cards, took Guardians of the Galaxy, combined it with Thanos, and went into that tournament having not played one game. It's actually round 3 of the tournament before I realized that Thanos' ability KO'd a character instead of stunned it.
Oh, my goodness.
I didn't fully understand the deck I was playing. Round 1, I never actually activated the gauntlet. I said, well, his hand's almost empty, and I don't really want to stun a character. I don't know if it'll do enough for me to do this. And here I was getting hit in the face by a character with Thor, I believe. He was knocking out characters with it, and I was like, well, I'd like to get a wound on Thor, but I'd need to get another one on there, and I'd rather just focus on the main character. So I never actually activated the gauntlet. I just used my powers around liberally, not realizing how powerful it was. So no, I had no crystal ball. I didn't even have a good premonition. That was all Colby Garish and Jason Hager telling me, and I trust their opinion on Constructed a lot more than I trust my own.
I think having such success with Thanos and not even using the gauntlet says something about the power level of that card.
Well, he's terrible if you don't use the gauntlet. Let's just get that out there right there.
He's much less good. Yeah.
My first round opponent, luckily, was playing a Captain America deck that wasn't insanely good. They actually did coverage of that matchup, and I got that. As I was starting to get into the groove of things, I really realized how much power I had, and it was round 4 when I realized I could start sacrificing my own characters by re-recruiting them in order to level him up. By round 5 or 6, I was completely in the groove and getting Gauntlet off as quickly as possible. It's a deck that rewards bad play, which is never a good sign for a deck.
So in something that I hope becomes a regular tradition here on the show when we have guests, I would like to ask you about fantasy cards. Whether you have just an IP that you'd like to see brought to the game, or if you have a specific character that you've sketched out what you think it would be cool for him to look like in Versus. What do you got for us?
Oh, goodness. Well, I was a big fan of Ecstatics, so I'm going to, you know what? I'm going to go with something that I loved out of the new Legendary game. They have a Deadpool. I think the Deadpool right now is kind of weak. We could have a Deadpool that has an ability green, activate, give Deadpool +1/+1 for each character in play that has flavor text.
I like that a lot.
Yeah, it's not my original idea. I didn't think too much about this. I'm not a big designer. In the new Legendary Deadpool game that they've got coming out soon, that's actually their 8-powered character, and I think it would translate really well in the game. Fantastically flavored, great setup, and I've got to admire the people in Versus, even as I don't think that their marketing team is fully together. They're not selling the fantastic products they make. I really, really admire their game designers and the level of flavor they're trying to give the Marvel Universe.
I could not agree with you more. And having been with Old Versus to the bitter end, I feel a little bit frustrated that Upper Deck seems to be kind of making some of the same fumbles. I mean, things as simple as I complained on a previous show how the OP kits don't seem to have any kind of cohesion. It's just random stuff. And while it's all cool stuff, wouldn't it be cooler if the month Aliens came out, the second kit was announced, and we got extended art Aliens characters and a playmat that fit that theme? It feels like a giant missed opportunity to me.
Yeah, they really need to get things together. All their games are fantastic, and they continue to give away more money than their tournaments could possibly bring in. I mean, never mind Versus, which is apparently their number one market right now. They had 17 people show up for a 10K for Predator at Gen Con. So they're not getting the name out. They're trying to throw money at things without actually doing the marketing, getting the hype right. They just need to really rethink their plan. I think getting rid of Thanos and Singularity, who give new players negative experiences right off the bat, will help. I think getting more hype out there, doing more networking, more things that are involved with movie releases. Marvel's listed every movie they've got coming out till 2020. They need to plan set releases with that movie release so that there's more cohesion in there and better cross-marketing and stuff like that. So I wish them the best. They are such fantastic game designers. I really can't emphasize that enough.
Do you feel that between Gen Con 15 to 16 that there was an overall uptick in player skill level, I guess? That first year, it kind of makes sense that people don't know the game, so they're learning their deck and learning the game like you just described kind of at the same time. Did you feel that people were more serious and knew what they were doing more at the 16 Gen Con?
People really picked up it very quickly in the 2015. That's one thing that was kind of exciting, was the game was one of those games that's easy to pick up, difficult to master, and I had a lot of deep and tight games there. Clearly, the best players in 2015 still got to shine. Certainly Saul took first place last year, took second. He's really shown himself to be the best player in the game, and I think that those same skills kind of have led people on. If you're quick on the uptake to learn a game and to put things together, then you're going to be able to quickly adapt your deck to whatever new sets bring you, and your skill level shows through. So no, I think it was pretty much even through the 2 years. But we've got a fantastic player base. A lot of them come from Old Versus, which really, really rewarded best players in the first place.
I haven't been able to make it to either Gen Con, but observing from a distance, it felt like that there was high levels of play both times around, and that was exciting.
Really refreshing. We've got a loyal fan base. Definitely. We've got great players, and they continue to shine, and I hope that they're able to build up the player base and keep things going, capture the casual market, if you will.
Yeah, I'm hoping we see Firefly. We know Upper Deck has the rights to it, and I would love to have Serenity equipment that I can put on Wash that does something, I don't know, changes my formation during my opponent's step or something like that.
Sure, yeah. They're really big on cross-marketing. All their games tend to pick them up. I have zero doubt we'll see Firefly soon.
So is there anything that you are involved in or working on that you wanted to plug?
Nothing I'm specifically working on. One of the fellow communities members, Mac Weiner, 808 Games, one of the things I got to play at Gen Con was a deck builder called Intrigue. Reminds me of a mix of the Dominion and Starfleet. Like Dominion, you pick 12 sets of cards. Like Starfleet, there's also generic cards and the ability to do attack. Characters have a lot of flavors. It's about to go up on Kickstarter. It was originally going up on Kickstarter today. Unfortunately, it got delayed, but it'll be coming soon. He's got a lot of the cards printed. I got to play it. He and his wife are fantastic, and I really think the game deserves success. So I hope everybody goes out to 808 Games, gets on their mail list, and helps kickstart that game into existence, because it's a lot of fun.
Awesome. I know we mentioned kind of briefly in our email correspondence that we both play Hearthstone. As kind of an aside, what do you think of the new Karazhan expansion? What deck are you playing right now?
Haven't played Hearthstone in a while. I've been playing a lot of BoardGames.com ever since I found that and realized I could play Race for the Galaxy or other board games at will, that's kind of taken most of my stuff. I was playing a lot of Warlock, my absolute favorite deck, my Arena, the only deck that I've gotten through the Arena to 12 wins 3 times with. Druid, I've heard that it's actually become much more constructed viable. So some of my friends play on a very high level. Brian Kibler, Brian Easton, I guess people named Brian that I know are very, very good at that game. I mostly watch them and admire that they how well they're doing, but I don't get to play a lot myself.
When I first got into Hearthstone and I started watching professional level events and I saw Brian Kibler casting, I thought to myself, that name sounds vaguely familiar. And then in doing the Versus show, in doing this show, I should say, I came across a list of winners from old tournaments. Like, oh, that's why he's familiar, because he played old Versus.
More than played old Versus. He, right after winning the first pro circuit, he was hired by Upper Deck.
Oh, see, I didn't know that.
He's also an old school Atlanta player, so that's how I know him. Of the 8 Magic Pro Tours that I went through, one of them actually involved beating him out in the top 4. So I've gotten to play him. Fantastic guy. Obviously, probably one of the best overall card gamers that has ever existed. Owns his own game shop now, so really sharp guy.
It's been surprising to me the amount of interconnectedness between Upper Deck and Magic and all these different card game entities. A lot of the same people's names show up in connection to all these different projects.
Yeah, and it's because they're going to be good players in Shine, and because our gaming community, I mean, gaming's grown out, but those of us who care enough to do things like play tournaments or go to Gen Con are still very, very niche. So you see a lot of the names pop up. I mean, one of the most fun things at Gen Con, I mean, friends have come and left and all of that, but Gen Con's almost a reunion for a lot of people. I bump into tons of people and say hi and pat them on the back and all that stuff. So it's really interesting that if you're good at one game, you're generally good at many and have what I like to refer to as the gamer mindset.
That is excellently put. Thanks for coming on the show. Again, I appreciate you taking time out of your day. Is there anything that you wanted to talk about that I didn't hit on in my questions, whether about Versus or kind of games in general?
I think we've covered everything. Hopefully everybody stays connected to the community. I think it's great that we've got so many great podcasts and write-ups and people that have so much energy. And let's try to get the game spread so that it sticks around for a long time. Like I said, Upper Deck's not doing a great job marketing themselves, so we kind of need to give them a boost. Get your friends in, get them to play, get them excited, and stay excited yourselves.
This has been the Build Phase podcast. Remember to head on over to thebuildphase.com and leave a comment in the form to be entered into this month's drawing. The prize for September is 2 Hellboy life counters from the collectible Hellboy set from the old Versus. I'm Mr. Ben. Go win some games.